Greetings and assalamu alaikum. I am Sister Danielle here with National Network View on behalf of the Silent Crime Report. And today I have special guest Jade X from Austin, Texas, as her and I are going to discuss the treatment and behavior of those who are in nursing home mental illness facilities. Is human trafficking happening in the facility? That's our question for today. So stand by. We'll wait for her to join us here shortly. While we wait, please hit notification at the bottom. Share comments, statements, questions that you may have during our conversation below. Follow us on all social media platforms, National Network View, here NNV News. Thank you all for tuning in as we stand by and wait for her, and thank you for your patience. Thank you all as we wait. Thank you so much for joining in today. There she goes. Thank you all for being patient. There we go. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you and see you very clear. Yes, ma'am.
There we go. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam. Can you hear me okay? I can hear you.
There's an echo. Can you hear me clear now?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Okay, your camera's stable for us. We want to have this deep conversation real quick. You ready?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for tuning in. For those that don't know, can you introduce yourself to us?
My name is Sister Jade, and I'm originally from New York City, and I'm here in the Austin, Texas area. That's right, New York in the house. I'm currently a LPN or LVN, licensed vocational nurse, and right now I'm specializing in hospice and palliative care. And so I deal specifically with the symptom management of those with terminal illnesses.
Yes, ma'am.
It doesn't necessarily mean, like imminence of death, but I do deal with the sickest of our population.
Wow. Yes, ma'am. That can be a very challenging daily activity. I can imagine.
Yes, ma'am. It can be.
And I must say, and on behalf of that, thank you for doing what you do. You know, to be someone who cares for the patients and the residents. It's a very special place for you in your heart to be able to take on that task.
Praise be to Allah. Thank you for your acknowledgement.
Yes, ma'am. Now, in the community, what do you do in the community? I want to hear it.
Now, in the community, as we are together in the community, I am one of the I'm in the 10,000 Fearless, so I'm a trained first responder. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. And that is going well for you all in Austin?
Yes, and how about you in Dallas?
We're making it happen. We passed out 1,200 cases of water today. So
wow, that's amazing. Praise be to Allah. That is amazing. Well done.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead,
so now,
Dallas.
Go ahead and get to yes, Dallas is making it happen.
Southwest region representing.
Yes, Southwest region.
That's
yes,
right.
Now, I want to, you and I had conversed previously, and in the past, of course, we're dealing with human trafficking, the passion that you have in that area, but also to the missing of our children in our communities, which is a very big thing. There was someone missing in Austin recently this week that was able to be found. Praises be to Allah. And also here in Dallas, there was a young girl, age of 15 years old, and she is still missing. So we're
Oh,
going to keep our hearts open out for her and her family for sure. But it happens so often. I want to ask you, how often do you hear or do you see an Amber Alert go out for one of our brown or black children in Austin?
I will say infrequently.
Hmm.
Infrequently.
Yes, ma'am. It's like, how is that? How's that? I mean, in your mind, how does that play out to see, not separating? We're not pulling coattails. We're not trying to make one bigger than the other, but just the reality base of the data that we see on the news and in our own conversations. How does that make you feel to know that our people are not being reported as missing? What goes through your mind when you see or you hear about that?
Initially, my visceral gut feeling is just anger. You
Mhm.
know, I just get angry at how we are underrepresented within the community at large. Our children and our people in general, we're not showcased as humans. We're even as victims. We they find something negative to say about it's like they victimize the victim when it
Yes, ma'am.
comes to us,
Yes,
and it's
ma'am.
just disheartening. It's frustrating, but it's a sobering reality in which we have to live in this society.
Yes, ma'am. And so when we deal with that conversation, Sister Jade, we deal with that conversation, what suggestions do you have for the viewers that are watching right now to help us protect our own children and those in our communities?
One thing that I could say is that we have to be security minded. And when I say security minded, we have to build our own community within our neighborhoods, because we live amongst one another, but we don't know one another as in the past. I know growing up in Harlem, in New York City, there was still a sense of community where you had the elders who knew who your parents were. They knew you, but you didn't necessarily know who they were. And they knew how to get in touch with a parent or a grandparent or someone connected to you. Nowadays, there's a disconnect, and our communities are fragmented. We no longer own our homes in our communities. So it's like we exist. And because we just exist, we don't get to know one another because there's no sense of ownership in our immediate environment. So I say we have to take make an extra effort to extend ourselves and get to know who is around us and be visible, especially when it comes to our children. Be visible.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. That's a great answer. And that information, we don't, I see people in grocery stores, at the mall, in a gas station, and that children just wander by themselves. And then they have that harping reality for that quick second. The child may have went to a different island. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about the fact that your child was snatched and taken to an unknown, unmarked facility or place, and you'll never be able to see them again.
Just that
We have to,
quick.
yes, ma'am. And we have to understand that organ harvesting is a reality. We have to understand that kidnapping, sex trafficking, human trafficking is a reality. So when you said the word patrolling our own, securing our own, we have to be able to definitely put that in the forefront of our minds. So thank you for sharing that information. You being in the medical field, I know much happens under your eyes and off your eyes, of course, that you see and that you hear. But I asked the question to you before about human trafficking happening in these mental illness facilities, these behavioral facilities, and of course, even nursing homes and LTAC, which is long-term acute care facilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So when I asked you that question, you were like, oh my goodness. So how was your digging and research in that area? How did that come out for you?
When you proposed that to me, I didn't really think about it. The you know how you know something exists, but I never thought about it quite like that. And I realized almost immediately how vulnerable our elders are in nursing home facilities, especially during this COVID era. I mean, before they were vulnerable, and I just think that they're even more vulnerable now. And in doing some research about abuse in nursing home facilities, the information that I was able to obtain was very disheartening. Abuse kind of is, they use the word globally. So it encompasses more than just, let's say, sexual abuse.
Yes, ma'am.
It also entails emotional, psychological, financial, and physical abuse.
Yes, ma'am.
And it affects 10% of our older Americans. That's just in our older population.
Mm-hmm.
We're not even talking about those who may be, as you said earlier, mentally and physically impaired, but may not necessarily be an elder.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we have those who are disabled and mentally ill who are affected under this umbrella of abuse as well. You know, it's not just our elders. And I had to take some frequent breaks in doing this research because, as I've stated, it was very sobering. It was a sobering truth. And the statistics were very alarming because it varies state to state. So when we're dealing with nursing home statistics and things of that nature, what constitutes abuse and neglect in Texas may be different in California, you know, versus Florida or, you know, New York. So there's not a definition that defines what that is across the board. And each state also has its own way, legal, you know, the legal penalty for this type of abuse varies as well.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
that was also very, it's a sobering truth.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was looking into this abuse, specifically towards our elders, I realized that it increases their risk of death. It
Mm-hmm.
increases their physical debility and mental illness. I say mental illness because we have, amongst our aging population, you know, we have things such as Alzheimer's or dementia,
Yes, ma'am.
and it affects them mentally. So it only exacerbates or worsens an existing issue. And it
Yes.
also increases the strain on our community resources, especially in the emergency rooms, because of the increased incidences of these behavioral disturbances, which then equals an emergency room visit.
Mhm.
And
Yes, ma'am.
in this COVID world, we've exhausted our community resources.
Mhm. Wow. I remember you mentioned to me the term, you said rabbit hole. The more you begin to research, the more you read, the rabbit hole just got deeper and deeper and deeper of information that we just don't know. And for those who are just joining into this conversation, I have special guest Jade X. She's a hospice and palliative nurse, and we're talking about what it looks like in the medical field when it comes to those who are being abused, but then you're talking about manipulation and also financial problems, and then too, human trafficking. Rape is happening in these facilities, and nothing ever happens. So I'm thankful that you all joined and tuned into this and share this information with your family. Um, it's personal to me, Sister J, because my mother's in a nursing home,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm making my duty to check on her and check on the staff, to make sure that that one right there, you can miss me with that, right? Because it happens, and I see those who don't have guests come by, those who don't have visitors, those who are just there, just and sitting in their element and not have anyone to talk to, and we have to be careful when dealing with these facilities. So you mentioned about the laws and regulations of Texas in particular, when it comes to reporting it. So what did you find in that part? How to report, or how are they reporting when someone has harmed them or mistreated them in the facilities?
I'm taking a deep breath because how these incidences are reported, they are self-reported. So it's very unlikely for the victim to report the abuse. One is because of their mental capacity to do so.
Yes, ma'am.
Two, especially within the facility and home, we also have to factor in, this is not just happening in nursing home facilities. This is happening at home as well.
Yes, ma'am.
So we have to think about all of the other abuses that coincide or are compounded onto this sexual abuse allegation that this elder is having to report on a person that they are totally dependent upon for the medications, for their activities of daily living, for their finances, and to have to then report this person makes them even more vulnerable than they already are.
Yes,
Not
ma'am.
to factor in those who may have the mental capacity. Think about the shame and the guilt that comes with this as well.
Yes, ma'am. It's very
It,
interesting.
it's yes.
Yes,
And,
ma'am. So,
it's not like a one size fits all approach to helping this individual. It's a multidisciplinary type of approach because we have to then seek legal action against financial exploitation.
mhm,
We have to consider housing.
mhm.
We now have to consider alternate caregiving. Um, there's so many other layers to this that has to be peeled back. And that's why it's a multidisciplinary approach to having some sort of an effective outcome. Not
Yes, ma'am.
optimal outcome, but
Yes,
an
ma'am.
effective
Yes.
outcome.
Wow. And I know there was the case in Texas a couple of years ago. There was a guy who was driving the disabled bus, bringing people from school, children, students from school to home. And most of them were in wheelchairs. And he was happening to be mistreating this young lady. And it came down a pipeline, of course, through some things that she was being abused by the bus driver. And then you think about even the home healthcare individuals who take care of these. They home healthcare people come through and do some very vicious and mean things to our elders, not just even the age. Because again, it can happen to a young girl.
Yes.
It can happen to a young child who's being forced to do many things. And then when it comes to manipulation too, the manipulation of this elder who's in a nursing home or LTAC facility, and they get money for disability. They get money from somewhere, wherever it's coming from, fund-wise, and they have an account. And those who are over the funds are manipulating the residents by saying, I'll keep your money if you don't do this exchange for me.
That's right.
Or I won't feed you this today because you didn't do what I asked you to do yesterday.
Because they're totally dependent upon that individual. And, you know, it's interesting that you mention it the way that you did, because this is a great segue into trafficking.
Yes.
Right? So you just talked about the financial exploitation. You talked about the physical, you know, abuse, the sexual and emotional abuse. And now the abuser is profiting off of this one person or persons, but when they commercialize the abuse, now it's trafficking.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's what I've learned, you know, that when you can monetize off of this individual or individuals commercially, meaning you turn over this profit again and again and again, now it's trafficking.
Yes, ma'am. Because most of them get paid monthly from SSDI oftentimes. And that money comes in, and now guess what? We have these stimulus checks coming in, you know, and so that's a money day for them.
So that's when financial exploitation turns into trafficking.
Yes, and there was a place in Colorado, a facility in Colorado 3 years ago. There was a couple of the residents who were in a mental illness facility, and they were pregnant.
Oh, yes.
And a couple of them come up to be, and a couple of them were sent off to underground abortion clinics to have abortions, so you can kill the evidence.
Right, so, and that's exactly where, you know, unfortunately, Medicare doesn't do the best job in enforcing the rules to the nursing home facilities to report this. Wow. And that was another staggering statistic. You know, there's law enforcement that, you know, there's a whole chain that has to happen in order to do this and do it correctly, right? So a lot of the abusers are not charged because it was never reported correctly to the local law enforcement to begin with. So that's why these things are prevalent and continue to be so, because the enforcement of Medicare is not what it should be. And that's why these cases are underreported, because the victim, they lack the capacity to do so.
Yes, ma'am.
And when they can,
yes,
like you just said, you know, care is being withheld from them because they're being exploited, because their loved ones are not present. So like you stated earlier, when you go to the nursing home facility to see your mother, you make your presence known. And this is not to discourage anyone from or make anyone feel bad if they have a loved one in a skilled facility, because, you know, a lot of times, depending upon what's going on, you don't have the way our society is constructed. It's all about work. It's not family oriented. So if you have to work, if you're an income earner in the home, it's difficult to care for your loved one who is dependent solely upon you for 24/7 care.
Yes,
So I
ma'am.
don't want to discourage anyone, or I don't want to make anyone feel bad about having to, you know, do what they need to do, which is best for their loved one. But I think making your presence known in these facilities, and like here we have, I lost my train of thought, but the Austin, like it's like a school for the mentally ill, ASH, right?
Okay.
The acronym is ASH,
Okay.
the Austin State Hospital for the Mentally Ill.
Yes, ma'am.
I think even in this COVID situation, if you are not able to see your loved one as you once could prior to COVID, the one thing that I know makes a big difference, and this is the inpatient, the hospice inpatient unit in which I work, just having that loved one come to collect their clothes to wash them. That's a big
Yes.
deal. That's a big deal, especially when your loved one is in a nursing home facility, because what you do is you make your presence known on a regular routine basis.
Yes.
And when you're able to establish a routine with the nursing home facility, you get to, like you said, you get to know the staff,
Yes, ma'am.
and you build a rapport. Especially with the CNAs, the nursing assistants. They
And
are the eyes and ears.
the DON. The DON
Yeah,
too.
they're the
Yes.
DON enforcers. And then you have your nursing assistants who are hands-on. They are the eyes and ears of the nurses on the floor.
Yes, ma'am.
And when you're able to establish a relationship with the staff like that, if they see something that is out of the norm, they're more likely to tell you.
Yes,
Versus
ma'am.
you having to find out. They're
Yes,
more
ma'am.
likely to tell you.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
when you wash your loved one's clothes, you know, you get to, I mean, of course, a lot of times they may be incontinent. So, but still, in dealing with that, you know their routine.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
you get to inspect the clothing. You know, are you seeing blood in the seat of the underwear? You know, things of that nature. If you know, those are some red flags.
Yes, ma'am.
Something is not going on, because all of a sudden I'm now seeing blood in the seat of my loved one's underwear or pants, where that wasn't the case. That way you have evidence, one, and then you report it to the facility, who now has to report that incident. They have to document that accordingly.
Yes, ma'am. Well,
And I think that's the,
how would you handle, Sister Jade, those who can't talk, those patients who are not able to speak for themselves, or those patients who
body language.
yes, ma'am, and then those who you know, that are not in present time, and that, I think that's a vulnerable action to most of these predators in different forms. They come on to those who cannot
That's
speak for
right.
themselves, who cannot move, who can't walk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so my question is to you: what advice, beside the clothing and checking on them and being present in their life in the facility, what suggestion do you have for those who are seeking a facility for their loved one in the future, even for themselves? You know, what needs to be looked out for?
I think one thing you can do is seek recommendations And once you get the recommendation, you know, you have to take it a step further, and like through the Texas State Department of Health, you can look through the website. That's a rabbit hole. But on that website, you can look at the citations that a nursing home that was recommended. How many citations has this facility had, you know, recently?
Yes.
That it's that's one way, you
Man.
know. I know.
Woo. You'll be amazed what you find. You'll be
I
amazed
know.
on
Even
the
five-star
statistics.
facilities may have citations that they're not going to tell you that.
No.
They're not obligated to tell you that. We had 5 citations for sexual abuse at our facility. Like, no, it's a business. It's a business. And Texas and California are the highest.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
And
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. As of right now, we're looking at 142 cases of sexual abuse cases in Texas during the COVID-19, because many individuals had to be there overnight because the weather conditions or not having anyone to fill in for you. So you have to be careful. Careful. When you sign your loved one up for a facility, do the homework. And then go there yourself and look and see what the bedding looks like, what it smells like in a
the
facility.
smell gives it away.
Yes.
The
Yes.
smell gives the smell is a dead giveaway. If it's
Yes. Yes. And not just even that, but you know, you're dealing with a lot of foreigners in the facilities who work there. You know, they're handling their business. But definitely do your research is the key, because we have to be mindful. This is your mother, your father, your cousin, your grandmother. You're putting them in the care of someone else. And everyone does not always have a great intention.
no.
So you have to be able, so when you're giving your parents or your loved one to someone to give the basic care of feeding them, brushing their teeth, bathing them, wound care, we have to be mindful that your loved one is exposed a lot and they're medicated a lot. So you have to make sure that when they're in the facility in a venue like that, you want to be there for them, because they already feel abandoned. They already feel neglected. Then they have some sick-minded individual doing the most, doing too much to your loved one. You have to be on that. And don't ignore when your mother or father says something. Take it for what it is. Even in their own quote-unquote sick mind, keep a radar on what they're telling you. They're speaking through you, to you. So be mindful of that situation for sure. Sister Jade, when you look at these young girls and young men who have to go to mental illness facilities, and they have a past, things have happened in their past, or not have happened in the past. But when you're putting a teenager in a facility like that, how much manipulation is happening to the youth who are put into mental facilities for care, under these doctors' care?
It's almost the same prevalence as our elders in a nursing facility. They're just as vulnerable, if not more, than our elders are in nursing home facilities. And just like our elders in the facilities, it's the same. You can close your eyes and just change the face of the individual, and they're susceptible in the same exact way, because they can be over medicated and sedated purposefully for the abuse to happen. A lot of times their allegations are dismissed because of their past. And mental capacity. Wow. I do know that there is in Pennsylvania Act 105, and that was passed I believe about 2014, 2015. And in that act, what they did was if someone made an allegation of sexual abuse or abuse of any kind, their past is not used against them. And this is just in recent years. Can you believe that?
It's hardening to my heart. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I mean, you got to think about the fact that your mom or your child is saying, "Mommy, daddy, cousin, whomever, I'm being abused in the facility. I'm being touched inappropriately. Come help me." And then you're invalidated.
Yeah, because they can say, well, you know, this child or this this teenager, this youth has had a past of sexual abuse or false allegations of sexual abuse that may have been dismissed due to their mental capacity.
Wow.
And that's another reason why it's underreported, because allegations doesn't necessarily mean it has to be documented in an incident report.
Yes, ma'am.
So the abuser can continue the abuse if like we discussed earlier, in situations such as these, the individual, the abuser, pretty much has to be caught in the act of the abuse. And it has to be reported, and it has to be documented properly, and then it has to go to the proper chain of command through local enforcement, and then it has to be reported to, you know, the state's health department, and then it goes up to the federal level. So there's levels to this, but it has to be documented and reported correctly in order for the abuser for the law to be enforced on that abuser.
Man, so say for example, the abuser goes from facility to facility to facility in between the investigations. How do they handle that?
And depending on the city and the state that you live in, that's something that is a variable in that situation.
That's
Cities
amazing.
in the same state may have different rules and regulations regarding facilities. I mean, you have the Medicare federal requirement, but like I said, they don't enforce. They don't enforce the law.
Yeah. Wow.
And the penalty.
Yeah.
To the abuser.
You mentioned about Pennsylvania. You mentioned to me about Pennsylvania before, no, Philadelphia before. There was a young man who worked as a CNA, and he was taking the patients down for bath time, and he was having other individuals down there with him that did not work at the facility, and they were abusing the elders in that manner, and he was getting paid.
That's sex trafficking.
He's getting paid for the abuse. And so a couple of them told what happened. No charges, no jail time, because there was no proof, because everybody was on medication, because everybody was either Alzheimer or dementia or had a past, as you mentioned before. So we have to, it's deep. Go ahead.
I know. And like as a nurse and someone within a healthcare facility, you have to, if you don't document, we all know in healthcare, if you don't document, it's not done. Right? So if you have someone with cerebral palsy, let's just say cerebral palsy, who is not only, they have like a global cognitive delay on top of physical debility. So you have the inability you lack the mental capacity to verbalize appropriately, depending upon the severity. But let's say this is severe. So with this severe neurological issue, you can't verbalize, you can't communicate appropriately, you can't advocate for yourself, you're physically debilitated, your limbs are atrophied, you are at total risk of being abused, and you are at the mercy of your caregivers in the facility. And with that being said, if I'm just going to put myself as the nurse on the floor. I like to know what's going on with each individual patient. That's just me.
Yes, ma'am.
And part of my assessment would be like a skin assessment. So if I have a patient who is debilitated and primarily bedbound, I know that that person is prone to skin breakdown.
Yes, ma'am.
So what I would like to do, I do this in the inpatient unit in which I work, but I learned this from a nursing home nurse. Her name was Jackie, and I'll never forget her. Jackie did rounds with me. I worked the night shift as a CNA while going to nursing school. And what Jackie did was she said, I'll take this part of the hall, you get that hall. And what we did was she changed the briefs. She did the brief changes. She because that was part of her skin assessment. And then if she had to do wound care, she was able to do wound care as well. So because she took that extra step, it, one, helped me as the nursing assistant, and two, I was able to learn through her what to report, what is report, what are some red flags that I need to tell her. And one thing that I would say, it would be a red flag for me in a nursing home if I have someone like I mentioned, with severe cerebral palsy, with mental, cognitive delay and physical debility, to have a STI.
Yes.
Right? So why would someone like that have a sexually transmitted infection? That is a red flag of sexual abuse. That needs to be reported.
Wow. Not just the staff, but even the other residents as well.
Let's not talk about resident to resident abuse, because that is also under the umbrella of abuse.
Yes, ma'am.
Resident to resident abuse, and not just in nursing homes, but in all facilities.
Yes, ma'am.
That is underreported.
Yes, so we come up with this information. And for those who are just joining in, thank you for tuning in. We're having a conversation with Sister Jade X, a nurse who has seen much, knows much when it comes to care of patients. We're talking about the treatment of our elders and mental ill patients as well, who possibly could be molested, being abused, or even being trafficked in a facility. It happens. I want to ask you a question, Sister Jade. The question is it really possible for human trafficking to happen at a nursing home or a mental illness facility?
Yes, because when you think about the word trafficking, you think they have to be transported from one location to another. And really, that is not the definition of what human trafficking is. It's really profiting off of, you're monetizing off of an individual through labor,
Yes,
and through, abuse. And in order for that to happen, let's just say labor per se, you mentioned earlier foreigners.
yes.
So you can have someone that's in a nice home, in a very affluent neighborhood, working as the housekeeper or what have you. But the owner of that home may be withholding their passport.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And having them work with no pay.
Yes, ma'am.
That is human trafficking.
Wow. even and we can't forget about the word exploitation.
Yes,
Exploitation.
and that's where all the other abuses come into play, because with trafficking, it's like saying D, all the above, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to factor in the physical abuse,
mm-hmm.
the financial abuse, which is, or financial exploitation, the psychological abuse, willful neglect,
mm-hmm.
withholding that person's basic needs.
Yes.
If you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're going to sleep outside.
Yes.
Or I'm not going to feed you. Or I'm not going to give you what you need to bathe. It's dehumanizing.
Yes, ma'am. Wow. Yes, ma'am. Yes, if you have any questions, please put them in the comment section below as we go into this conversation. Sister Jade, I thank you so much, but I want everyone to know this has to be a worldwide awakening.
Yes.
Why do I say awakening? It's happening more and more. Now, I'm sure it's been happening for centuries and decades, right? It's just not nothing new to us. But it's coming out little bit by little bit, and it's our duty to teach, share this information with our people. Sister Jade made some wonderful points, you all, some wonderful points in what's happening. Not from Sister Danielle. This is not for me. This is not my in facilities across the world, you all. This is we see. She sees it. She hears it. You can Google it. The numbers are not as they should be, Sister Jade, because you're not really able to go past 2015. I've noticed in researching this information, but just the fact of having one case, the fact of having one child, the fact of having one grandmother to be mistreated is enough. And so we have to take this thing a little bit further and bring awareness to this and be able to do some serious research before we even take on the responsibility of putting our loved one in a facility. Definitely.
I wanted to break down, we speak of abuse, and like I said, it's kind of a global umbrella term, but I went to nursinghomeabuse.org, and they kind of broke down some percentages of specified abuse. Physical abuse is 27, the prevalence is 27.4% in a nursing home facility. Now, we spoke on this, but I think we need to really pay attention to this. 22.1% is resident-on-resident abuse. 22.1%. 19.4% psychological abuse. 15.3% gross negligence. 7.9% specifically sexual abuse. And I'm pretty sure that this resident-on-resident abuse is sexual abuse, but they don't specify abuse.
Yes,
and then 7.9% financial abuse.
Yes, ma'am. Wow. How do you feel about that? How do you feel?
Again, I had to take a couple breaks. I had to take some breaks, kind of walk away from that, and just think about how this information that I'm sharing with you is close to 10 years old. So in 2021, there were no updated information as to the last maybe few years. A lot of what I found was as old as 2011 and as current as 2016, 2017.
Yes, ma'am.
So if the prevalence of these percentages were what they were then, I can only imagine what it is now in present time.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And I think all too often we don't talk about abuse enough. And some people are like, well, why? It's like, why would you want to talk about that? It's not to shame anyone, but our society and how it's constructed doesn't protect us.
That's right.
It doesn't protect us. We work so hard and we want the best. I assume good intentions when I say I think we all want the best for our family members. We want the best. And with that being said, you want to protect, how we're told to protect what you love.
That's right.
And when you're doing the best that you can as the provider for your family, and you're having to put your loved one in a nursing home facility, memory care unit, or such as ASH, a mental health institution due to whatever is going on with that person, I wouldn't want that individual to feel guilty for doing that. I think it's our moral, as a healthcare worker, I feel morally obligated to do the best, to do no harm. Yes, I have a license, and in that license, we are to do no harm.
Yes, ma'am.
You want the best for that individual. But I think, unfortunately, especially in the state of Texas, when it comes to being a caregiver, a home health attendant, a CNA, the payout is low. I don't know why, but the payout to caregivers is low, but the expectation is high.
Yes,
when we have family members who have dementia and they have some behavioral disturbances that go with that. Behavioral disturbance is a nice way of saying that grandma will hit or spit at you. As a low paid caregiver, you can see how abuse can happen unintentionally.
Yes,
if somebody hits you, your response is to hit them right back. It's a visceral response.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? But that's abuse. But if that caregiver's love, if that loved one's family member that's in charge of that person dismisses you, then you can see how that abuse can continue.
Yes, ma'am. Wow.
And it's innocent. It can start off innocently and be progressive.
Yes, ma'am.
Because the loved one is not present. And that's why when you mentioned, earlier in the conversation, that you make it your business to make your presence known when you check on your mother at the facility, that's the best thing that you can do. That should be your intention when you place your loved one in a facility to begin with. You don't just place them there and then forget about your loved one. Right. You place them there because now they have 24/7 care that you can't provide. So you are obligated to now check on them to see how they're doing, because you no longer have that responsibility of doing it yourself.
Yes, ma'am.
But that doesn't excuse you at all. And I think, once a loved one goes into a facility, it's hands off. And once you feel like you're no longer obligated, you really put that person in the predicament to be abused.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't think people think about it quite like that.
Yeah.
When you neglect to check on your loved one, because you feel like it's hands off, you now make them even more vulnerable and prone to abuse of any kind.
I just think about that. I think about the information about your loved one not eating dinner, or your loved one not being bathed, or your loved one not being talked to, or your loved one just in there, bed sores getting worse, ulcers in the mouth, thrash in the mouth because they're not taking care of the mouth. They're not brushing the teeth. They're not cleaning the dentures in the mouth. They're not cleaning the ears, and it's a rough piece. And then to come here and aggressively handle me, or to force upon me, aggression of sexual activity towards me, for a person who's in there, they already feel low.
Mm-hmm.
They're already probably not in present time.
Mm-mm.
They already feel no one cares for them. And to have a sick-minded individual come and take advantage of those individuals who are vulnerable like that. So my question to you, Sister Jade, when you're selecting a facility for a loved one, how important is it? You expressed about being involved. You expressed about checking the facility out, what it looks like. But how important is it for us as families, not just one individual, but the family, to collectively select a facility for their loved one?
I would say, try to select a facility that's closest to the primary caregiver, right? We talked about checking out the citations of that facility. The reason why I brought up proximity is because sometimes family members are not even in the same city as their loved one, or state even. And if you are able to choose a good facility that's within reach, then you can establish a routine.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the family can build off of your routine and
Yes,
and share the responsibility.
Yes,
I don't
ma'am.
think it should be left to just one person.
Right.
I think as a family, we should share that responsibility. Because again, when you make your presence known, the facility respects that.
Yes, ma'am.
They respect that. And when you build that rapport, they will communicate and collaborate with you far better than if you neglect it, because it's neglect. When you just drop off your family member, don't come back, that's neglect.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I totally 100% agree. Sister Jade, I want to go ahead and close out. Is there anything that you would like to share? You have the world's attention right now.
Well,
we discuss what we have. Go ahead.
As we stated earlier, for those who may have just joined us, I again just want to state that nursing home facilities are not all bad. They're not all bad. And if your family member is in a nursing facility, I hope this kind of jolts you into what we just discussed, coming up with a routine to check on your loved one, even in this COVID pandemic. What can I do to make my presence known to help my loved one cope with being in that facility? Even if grandma, auntie, or uncle, they may not acknowledge your presence due to their presence of mind or lack thereof. That still doesn't excuse you from taking care of your loved one and taking charge of and protecting what you love. As a family, and oftentimes family doesn't necessarily have to include those who you're related to. As